Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good day to all our viewers and all our listeners. I'm going to start with a question today. What if the greatest threat to the future of medicine isn't artificial intelligence, but it's our failure to lead it? Not regulating it from a distance, not fearing it from the sidelines, but leading it with clinical wisdom, strategic clarity, and an absolute commitment to the patient at the center. This is our Hikigai podcast, and I'm your host, Lalitha Ramamurthy. And my singular mission is to bring every conversation that we bring in here or in this forum to bring you the thinkers, the thought leaders, the builders, the practitioners who are doing exactly that. It's my pleasure to have who we have today on our speaker board, and I'm very excited about who we have today. Our guest today has done something rare, and she's crossed the full length of healthcare from besides to the from the besides to the boardroom and brought her clinical instincts with her every step of the way. She started as a physician and then she did what very few doctors do. She went back to school for an MBA, joined Oracle, and built a career advising health systems at the enterprise level on strategy, operations, and innovations. She's now the Chief Strategic Officer, a keynote speaker on stage across the country, and a national best-selling author who works in reshaping how physicians think about leadership. Welcome, Sarah. I should say it's Dr. Sarah Matt. It's a pleasure to have you on board. And, I can go on and on with just all the commendable things that you've done, but I would love to converse with you and make this more interactive. So the floor is yours, and I would love to start off with your, bites to begin with.
Absolutely. So super excited to be here. And I think that what you folks are doing in this community is really interesting because right now there's so much fear about AI, but there's also a fear of keeping things the same too. And those of us who have been deeply in the healthcare system recognize that, especially in the United States, where our population is aging, where margins are getting smaller, we have to find new solutions. And sometimes the tools to do that are AI. So being open to that and understanding the risks and benefits can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sarah. So we'll go right on to our questions for today, and then we have some rapid fire too. So let's kick it on. So, Sarah, I want to start off with a very beginning of your story because I think it holds the key of everything that we're going to converse about today. From the clinician to the chief strategic officer, what was the turning point and how does that look?
So that's interesting. When I was at the end of my fellowship, so I'm a surgeon, my fellowship's in burns. My fellowship was half research, half clinical. And I remember writing for grants. I remember doing all this complex experimentation, and everyone around me just complained. But it was business cases and it was operations and project management. And I realized I had maybe different skills than some of my colleagues. And at the same time, I felt, a little bit confined at the bedside because you could only take care of one person at a time, maybe 20, maybe 40 in a day. And I thought, how could I make a bigger impact? And that's why I made the switch over. I realized I didn't have all the skills I needed. Hence, I went and got my MBA. But when I moved into the tech sector, all of a sudden I was impacting hundreds, dozens, millions, and more every single day.
Interesting. That is quite a journey and very commendable and, truly a good trendsetter for many others who probably don't want to get into the business aspects of bringing a practice together. I think it's very important to have that skill set also with today's world. Okay, so what does the responsible AI actually look like at the bedside? You've talked about moving from bedside to corporate world, and there's a lot of talk about scaling AI responsibly in healthcare, right? But that phrase can mean very different things to a health system CTO versus a primary care physician seeing 25 patients a day. From your vintage point, as both as a clinician and as a strategist, what does real responsible AI deployment look like?
So I love that you shined a light on the fact that responsible AI means so many different things to so many people. And so the way I think about it is that it kind of depends on who you're talking to, from the vendor perspective, from the provider perspective, from the patient perspective. So as a provider, it's hard because, the liability of our patient's care is put onto us. And so when we think about responsible AI, we want to understand what it's doing. We want to understand its limitations. We understand what is actually good for and when we should push back on AI and when we should say, it's definitely doing a better job than I can. So the responsibility in that case is definitely around transparency and helping clinicians understand the tools. From a patient perspective, again, there's just as much, I'd say, consternation in, oh no, AI is involved in my care. But again, I think that the trust is built through real communication with the people that they are used to interacting with and giving them the information so they can decide if this is okay for them. On the vendor side, it's tricky. And I've been on the vendor side for so long, building all sorts of interesting things. It's not necessarily the vendor's job to consent patients for AI. It is partially their job to make sure that the people buying it understand what they're getting. Now, if you're buying for a large practice or a hospital, you have to remember, you have to ask the questions and you have to make sure you get the information for the people in your organization. So it's definitely a relationship between everyone, and you have to start asking the right questions.
Excellent. Yeah. So the cohesiveness is very critical there and have the links done right. Okay. Now onward to something which is the buzzword and probably one of the most talked about 25, 26 in most of the health conferences. AI scribes ambient documentation and the physician burnout crisis, right? Physician burnout is definitely a real thing, and we've all recognized it. It's an epidemic levels, and the documentation's burden is one of the top drivers. Now, AI scribes and ambient listening tools are now pretty much entering every practice, independent practices. What is your take on how these tools, when implemented thoroughly and thoughtfully, can genuinely restore the joy in medicine for the frontline physicians?
I think we all recognize the benefits. Okay, great. I don't have to sit in front of the computer. I don't have to type during the entire encounter. Now I can actually make eye contact. Now I can actually have a conversation. Now I'm not desperately trying to write down notes. That all sounds really great. I think the issue with physician burnout, and again, burnout amongst all healthcare workers, is that right now, I think I just read an article that said we're at an all-time low of 43% burnout for physicians. And, that's not a good number. 43% is not a good number. I think that at this point, everyone's tired. Everyone's just really tired. And taking care of patients is really hard. It takes an emotional toll. It takes a time toll. It's a lot of mental energy. So if we can take some of the writing part out of the equation, great. I can spend more time on the emotional aspects, on the mental aspects of solving real problems. One of the things I see as a caveat to that is that oftentimes, depending on the practice, the time that is saved for the provider is not being given back to the provider. It's being given back to the practice to add in one more patient, two more patients. So yes, ambient scribe, lots of good things there. It all depends on how your practice is growing though, and what the expectation is. Are you going to get one less patient a day and therefore you get time? Or are they going to cram in a couple more appointments?
Interesting. You brought this up, and I think we very recently we had a conversation with another physician who was talking about the incentives that really matter, and in what incentives would be that, personally for the physician, because the physician who is acting there or who is actually using these tools is a human himself or herself. So I think that's really where it really, drives the message home. So lessons from Oracle being there for with all your experiences, what big health tech gets right and wrong? Your time in Oracle gave you a rare view of how large health tech companies operate or approach the market, right? Without naming names, and totally be your choice. What are the biggest strategic mistakes that you saw large players make when they're trying to actually reach to the frontline workers, and what can what can leaner and more mission driven companies learn from that?
So I've been at very large places like Oracle. I've been at mid-sized places like NextGen. I've been at a ton of startups with some fun exits, and I do a ton of fractional C-suite and consulting work right now with early stage companies. So I will generalize this, so it's not just one company. But what I'll say is that oftentimes our largest companies, mid-size and above, do a great job at things like really dealing with the technical aspects of things because they have huge teams of really expert technicians. They've also seen a ton of different clients. Everyone knows that if you've seen one instance of Epic, you've seen one instance of Epic. There's so much difference between different kinds of patients, providers, health systems. And when you're doing it at a scale, you've been able to see lots and lots of those. So you can really help make workflows in general better, things of that sort. What I'd say becomes easier for smaller companies than bigger companies is just their ability to change super quick. At the same time, a early stage company or a small company, yes, they can pivot on a dime, but do they have the track record that a hospital system is willing to actually get on board with? The liability is then on the health system. And there's a lot of problems, I'd say, with health systems trying to decide, do I want to take on this smaller company as a partner, or should I go with the big guys because I know I'm not going to get fired for that?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very important point. The advantage there is very critical, and also having the track records. So now this brings us to the trust gap, right? Just when you're asking that question, why are physicians still skeptical about, off the clinical AI? I mean, there is a huge disparity in that, I should say, and it's still kind of building its confidence, right? Despite strong evidence and compelling use cases, physician adoption of clinical AI is still kind of in its nascent stage, or maybe in its baby stage, I would say, and it remains uneven. As someone who's bridged the gaps and both in the clinical and the strategic world, what do you see as one of the core drivers for this skepticism?
So, first of all, providers are the smartest dumb people you ever know. That means they're really amazing at so many things. Sometimes they don't know a lot about other things. And so, when there's unknown or the inability to get the information they need, of course, they're going to be skeptical. The skepticism is actually a superpower, especially when you're taking care of patients. And so, what I would say is that, like anyone, not just docs, everyone's looking at AI, kind of considering what's what. And even though there's great studies over here or great studies over here, I think that their caution is reasonable because they're trying to figure out, how does this relate to my practice, my patients? And if they haven't seen data that really shows it's going to help my panel of 50 to 60-year-old women, blah, 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 in this state, it's hard to say it's definitely going to work. So they're a tough audience because they have real patients on the line. They have to take the liability. They don't want to harm people. And they also want to do good work. So ultimately, if we can help them understand how the data and evidence really mirrors the people they're taking care of in their practice, I think it'd be a lot easier. Because right now we're saying, oh, yeah, all this good stuff's happening. And they're like, that's great. What about the people I'm taking care of today?
Interesting. So give them context about their own practice, and add more value for them and personalize it for them. That's very important. All right. Now this is about yourself and your book. Very commendable, and I think it's wonderful that you've achieved such great milestones. The ideas that needed to be said. You're a national best-selling author, and that's no small feat for any author, let alone a practicing physician. What is the central idea in your book? And tell us more about it. And how did it feel in terms of the healthcare world desperately needing to be heard? How did you project that in your book?
So when I was writing this book, I really wanted to write about something impactful, but also to bring people together. And I think that one of the things that everyone has issues with is access to healthcare. Doesn't matter where you live, what your socioeconomic status is, anything. Everyone's having a hard time accessing healthcare the way they need to. And so oftentimes we hear the word access kind of just thrown about, oh, well, we need better access, but it doesn't actually dig into the real problem. So I've taken the word access and really split it up. So I split access into geographic, financial, cultural, trusted knowledge, and digital. And oftentimes, if you look at almost any healthcare problem within a system, it's often at least one of those things. Unfortunately, on the healthcare side, systems tend to look at those problems and aim at one. Digital is a really easy one to aim at because you can buy digital, right? But it's hard to buy trust. And so oftentimes we're aiming at fixing one of those pillars, but we're not succeeding because we're not looking at all of them.
Interesting. Yeah, you do need to look at it from the different perspectives. And I certainly look forward to reading your book now that you've added more personal value to it. Now, this is about scaling of the innovations and without losing the human element. And I know that you have kind of thrown some light on it, especially bringing the human element of the physician being paying attention. And one of the great paradoxes of AI in healthcare is that the more we automate, the more we risk in eroding the therapeutic relationships. And that makes medicine more meaningful, right? How do you counsel innovators and healthcare professionals or healthcare systems to scale AI to be delivered and to be enabled seamlessly?
I think the first thing is defining the problem. And I know that seems simplistic, but oftentimes, especially in a health system, an executive will go to a conference, see something shiny, say, we're bringing this in, we're doing AI. And it doesn't necessarily solve a problem that the boots on the ground folks actually have. So if you're actually solving a real problem people want solved, then you're not going to get nearly as much pushback and friction. Doctors, nurses, other healthcare workers, they're great at certain things, and they also enjoy doing certain things. Help them solve the problems of the things they don't enjoy, are super repetitive, that are bringing them down for the day. Don't solve the problems of the things they enjoy, the things that are making a difference in patient care. So when we talk about having a human in the loop, a lot of times people are nervous about the fact that doctors and patients or nurses and patients aren't going to have that relationship. Well, don't solve for that part. Solve for the other stuff. Have your technology or tool solve for real problems that need to be solved that they don't want to deal with, like documentation, like all these other things. Don't solve for the relationship aspect where humans can actually maybe do an even better job.
Interesting. That's a very, very important point made, and certainly something that needs to be highlighted. Onward to our last before we get to the hit the rapid fire. What does the future of the independent practice look like to you in about 5 years? Independent physician is under enormous pressure. They're even talking about the individual private practices going obsolete or probably being replaced by AI systems, from payers, from documentation burden, from corporate consolidation. But many AI gives independent practices a real fighting chance as well to compete and thrive. What is your vision on that? And would love to hear it from you. Maybe around 2030, what do you see that to be?
So I have a very different view on this than I think a lot of folks, because for the last 10 years, having a private practice has been next near impossible because you had to hire in so many people to assist you. And if you're doing it on very small margins, again, that's a lot because you're not only practicing, but you're also running a whole business. Right now, we have so many interesting tools to help automate the business aspects. We can take care of patient management. We can take care of scheduling. We can take care of all these different pieces in more automated ways. I'm not saying AI because it sometimes is AI and sometimes it's just a rules based engine. But today we have the tools. So an individual can run a business a lot easier than they could have 10 years ago. So I actually think it'll be interesting to see who decides to go out on their own because they can actually run the business now a lot easier in an automated way so they can practice the exact way they want to.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very different perspective. I'm glad you brought that to light. So it's wonderful that you've got the business perspective of it, and that two sides of the reflection certainly kind of adds more value to it. Thank you so much, Sarah. So we have some rapid fire for you here. Coffee or green tea before a big keynote, and is there a pre-stage ritual you swear by?
So usually at conferences, there's way too much coffee. So it's probably coffee.
Coffee.
And
All right.
then from a pre-ritual, I don't. I usually am, doing all the things at a normal conference, eating breakfast with attendees, networking, going to sessions, and all of a sudden it's time for me to do my keynote, and I'm there.
It almost seems like you are living the moment, and you just do it. That's the impression that
Go
I
do
get.
it.
So awesome. All right, one book every physician turned leader should read besides your own.
So I just read this book, and I've actually reread it, which is unusual for me because I usually don't reread. But it's called The Portfolio Life, and I find it very helpful because I actually consider my life like a portfolio. There's different things I add to it. They serve different needs. And, maybe my parents or my grandparents could have one job. They meet all their friends there. They'd make their money there. It was their whole community. Today it's different. And so I think it's interesting to think about where does practicing medicine fit into your portfolio of all the things that you want for your life? Because it might not be the one and only thing. It might be just part of it.
Interesting. I'll put it to my list too. All right. The one AI capability in healthcare that excites you the most right now, and the one that worries you the most.
I'm actually not worried about AI. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but the tech's the easy part. The technology will continue to increase. I'm not worried about the tech part. I'm worried about how we're going to adopt it, the policies we're going to put in place, and how we're going to monitor it. So it's not that I have one specific technology I'm worried about, it's how we're going to govern it properly. What I'm excited about is drug discovery. I think that of all the times to be a human, right now, I could see that in 10 years. Maybe we're curing cancer. Maybe we're actually having real ways to stop diseases that have been killing people for years and years.
Most certainly, most certainly. That's definitely a very exciting part of it. So, finish this sentence for me, Sarah. The best thing about being a physician that no MBA program could ever teach you is.
About real people, real patients.
And the last one. If you could send one message directly to an overworked, burned out primary care physician listening to this right now, what would that say?
You're not stuck. So just because you're an overworked primary care physician today doesn't need you need to be one tomorrow. We have so many skills. We have so much expertise. We can do so many things. Just have to decide how to use your time. And I'm positive you'll find a way to make it lucrative enough to live how you'd like to.
Fantastic. That was just one very interactive and very jiving conversation for the morning for me. I think you gave me an extra boost of caffeine with our talk. Thank you so much, Sarah. And to all our listeners today, I think it's only worth bringing in, people like Sarah who have a multifaceted approach to all what they do, and we look forward to having you, Sarah, more in our Hikigai studios, maybe in a bigger panel where we could have some interactive discussions. And thank you so much for your time. And to all our listeners, stay tuned to Hikigai Podcast and please do visit us. Thank you very much, Sarah.